I'm 70 years old. My name is Elijah Vance. I've lived long enough to know that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, and the quietest man is the one you should fear. They say grief is a thief. It steals your breath, it steals your sleep, and if you aren't careful, it steals your mind. But sometimes grief clears the fog. Sometimes when the tears dry up, they leave behind something harder, something colder, like iron forged in the winter wind. I just buried my only son, and before the dirt had even settled on his casket, the woman he married, the woman I welcomed into my home, tried to bury me right alongside him. She looked at my calloused hands and saw a broken-down old carpenter. She looked at my silence and saw defeat. She didn't know that I wasn't packing my bags to run away. I was packing for war. So, pour yourself a drink, sit back. Let me tell you how a simple mechanic's father brought down a house of cards with nothing but the truth and a very long memory.
The wind off Lake Michigan cuts right through you in November. It's a wet cold, the kind that settles in your marrow and refuses to leave. But standing there at Oakwood Cemetery, watching that polished mahogany casket lower into the frozen earth, the wind was the warmest thing I felt. My boy, Marcus, 42 years old, gone. My hands were shaking, trembling so bad I had to clasp them behind my back. 42. A healthy man doesn't just drop dead. The coroner's report said sudden cardiac arrest, but my mind couldn't make the pieces fit. Marcus was a mechanic. He had hands like mine, strong, steady, capable of lifting an engine block without breaking a sweat. He didn't have a weak heart. He had the strongest heart of anyone I ever knew. The community was there, of course. Folks I'd known for 50 years on the South Side. Deacon Miller had a heavy hand on my shoulder, muttering prayers I couldn't hear over the roaring in my ears. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor since the 70s, was sobbing into a lace handkerchief. We were a family, bound together by this impossible, heavy grief. And then there was Vanessa. She stood right next to me, shivering in a dress that cost more than my first truck. Designer black, heels sinking into the mud, shoes meant for a runway, not a graveyard. She wore sunglasses so big they covered half her face, hiding eyes that I suspected were perfectly dry. I watched her out of the corner of my eye. While the preacher spoke about the River Jordan and crossing over to glory, Vanessa wasn't looking at the casket. She was checking her watch. It was one of those sleek, expensive smartwatches. I saw the blue light reflect on her sunglasses as she swiped her thumb across the screen, then tap it impatiently. Tap, tap, tap. The preacher said, "Amen." My friends moved in to offer comfort, to hug the old man who had lost his only child. I wanted to stay. I wanted 5 minutes alone with my boy before they threw the dirt on him. But before I could take a breath, I felt claws on my arm. "That's enough, Eli," she whispered. Her voice wasn't soft with sorrow. It was sharp, annoyed. "Let's go. We have guests." I turned and looked at her. I really looked at her. For the first time, I didn't see the woman my son had loved. I saw a stranger checking a schedule while I buried my heart.
The reception back at my bungalow in Bronzeville was a blur of noise and smells. My house, the one I built with my own 2 hands alongside my late wife Martha, was filled with the scent of fried chicken and collard greens. People spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories about Marcus. They looked at the photos on the mantel. Me and Martha on our wedding day. Marcus as a boy in his Little League uniform, missing his front teeth. I sat in my old armchair, the leather worn smooth over decades, and I just felt numbness. Eventually, the last guest left. "Call us if you need anything, Brother Vance," they said. "We're praying for you." The house went quiet. The sun was setting, casting long, melancholy shadows across the floorboards I had laid myself 40 years ago. I was exhausted, down to my soul. All I wanted to do was go to my room, shut the door, and speak to Martha's ghost. Then, Vanessa walked in from the kitchen. She had changed. Gone was the black funeral dress. She was wearing designer jeans and a tight-fitting crimson sweater. She looked relaxed, relieved even, like she had just finished a chore she hated. "Okay," she said, crossing her arms and leaning against the doorframe. "The show's over." I looked up, the fog of grief making her words sound foreign. "Show? The crying, the sad old man routine? It's done. We need to talk." I tried to stand, my knees aching. "Vanessa, I can't talk right now. I just buried my son." "I know," she said, inspecting a fingernail painted the color of fresh blood. "And I need you to listen. I need you to stop crying, pack your bags, and get out." The words hit me harder than a physical blow. The air left my lungs. "Get out?" I stood up straight, the shock cutting through the exhaustion. "Vanessa, what are you talking about? This is my home. I built this house with Martha. I raised Marcus in this house." She laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that had no business in a house of mourning. "No, Eli, not anymore." She walked over to the kitchen drawer, my kitchen drawer, where I kept the spare keys and the flashlight, and pulled out a manila folder. She slapped it onto the coffee table between us. "This was signed 6 weeks ago," she said, tapping the paper. "It's a quitclaim deed. He signed the house over to me." I fumbled for my reading glasses, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped them. I picked up the document. It was a mess of legal jargon, but I saw the important lines. Grantor, Marcus Vance. Grantee, Vanessa Vance. And at the bottom, a signature, Marcus Vance. But it looked wrong. It was shaky. The M was too round, lacking the sharp, confident strokes my son used. I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would he do this? He would never." "He was in debt," Vanessa said, dropping onto the sofa and crossing her legs. "Deep debt. We needed collateral for a loan. The house was the only thing of value he had that I could use." A lie. I knew it was a lie as surely as I knew my own name. I had given Marcus the seed money to start his mechanic shop 10 years ago. He paid me back, with interest, in 5. That shop was a gold mine. Marcus didn't owe anyone a dime. He was meticulous with his money, just like his mother. "He wasn't in debt," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You don't know anything about his life. You're just the old man he visited on Sundays out of pity. He was in trouble. I helped him. He gave me the house." "He wouldn't do this," I insisted, the paper trembling in my hand. "Well, he did," she snapped, her patience evaporating. "And now he's dead, which makes me the sole owner. And I am selling this dump. I need the money. So you have 30 days. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a vicious hiss. 30 days. And if you aren't out by then, I will call the Chicago police and have you thrown out for trespassing. Do you understand me, old man?"
I stared at her. This woman my son had loved. This woman who had eaten at my table for 5 years. She had waited until the very day I put my son in the ground to throw me into the street. I looked at the signature on the paper again, the fake loop of the M. I thought about her checking her watch at the graveside. I thought about the debt. And in that instant, something inside me changed. The overwhelming, crushing grief didn't disappear. It crystallized. It turned from a fog into a block of ice, cold, hard, and sharp. My hands stopped shaking, my back straightened. The old carpenter was gone. The Patriarch was waking up. She was expecting me to cry, to beg, to scream. I just nodded, slowly. "All right, Vanessa." She blinked, thrown off balance. "All right? Just like that? You aren't going to fight?" "If that's what the paper says, then that's what it is." "Good," she said, trying to regain her footing. She looked relieved, but also a little confused. "So, 30 days. I want you out by the 1st of the month." I shook my head. "I don't need 30 days." I turned and walked past her toward my bedroom. "What are you talking about?" she asked, following me. I went to my closet. I pushed past my church suits and my work shirts. In the very back, under an old quilt Martha had stitched by hand, was a small, worn canvas duffel bag, the one I always kept packed for my fishing trips. I pulled it out and placed it on the bed. "What is this?" Vanessa's eyes went wide. "Were you planning on leaving?" I zipped the bag. It was already packed with a change of clothes, my shaving kit, and a small, hardbound black ledger. I walked back into the living room. "Vanessa," I said, my voice quiet, "you have no idea what you've just done." I walked to the front door. "Wait!" she yelled, and for the first time I heard a flicker of panic in her voice. "Where are you going? You can't just leave right now. What am I supposed to tell people?"
I stopped at the door, my hand on the brass knob I had installed myself in 1985. I turned and looked back at her, standing in the middle of the house Martha and I had built, the house she had just stolen. I gave her a small, sad smile. I have things to do. I stepped out onto the porch into the biting night air. I pulled the door shut behind me, the familiar click echoing in the silence. I didn't look back. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. I walked down the steps onto the sidewalk, under the orange glow of the streetlights I had known for 50 years. I heard Vanessa laugh through the closed door, a high-pitched, victorious sound. "Fine, go! Good riddance!"
She thought she had won. She thought the old man was broken and defeated, wandering off into the night to die in a shelter. She thought she had just inherited a house. She had no idea she had just declared war on a man who owned the entire block. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. I walked 2 streets over and hailed a cab. "The Palmer House Hotel," I told the driver. When I got to the room, clean, quiet, anonymous, I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the window, looking out at the city skyline, at the buildings I had helped build and the ones I secretly owned. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Olivia Sterling," a sharp voice answered on the second ring. "Olivia," I said. "It's Eli." "Eli? My God, the funeral was today. Are you okay?" "No," I said. "I'm not. Vanessa just gave me 30 days to get out of the bungalow. She has a quitclaim deed. She says Marcus signed it over to her." There was a silence on the line. "Olivia Sterling is the best attorney in Chicago. She manages the Martha Vance Trust. She knows where every skeleton is buried because she helped me dig the holes." "Eli," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "you know that's impossible." "I know," I said, "but she doesn't. She thinks I'm just a retired carpenter with a pension." "She has no idea about the trust?" Olivia asked. "I never asked. She was too busy looking at herself in the mirror to ask who actually owned the roof over her head." "Go to sleep, Eli," Olivia said. "I'll handle the paperwork in the morning." "And Eli?" "Yeah? By tomorrow afternoon, she's going to wish she'd never learned to write her name." I imagine Vanessa slept better that night than she had in months. She was sleeping in my bed, on the mattress where Martha took her last breath. She probably woke up feeling like royalty, stretching out her limbs, thinking the old man was shivering on a park bench somewhere or curled up in a shelter. She walked through my home like she had conquered a kingdom. She ran her fingers over the wainscoting I had sanded by hand. She mentally tore down the wallpaper Martha had picked out in '98. She stood in my kitchen and made herself coffee, pouring it into Martha's favorite mug, the blue ceramic one with the chipped rim that Marcus had given her for Mother's Day 20 years ago. She sat at the oak table I built, propped her feet up on the chair Marcus used to sit in, and made the call she'd been itching to make. "Yes, hello, is this Chicago Premium Realty? I'd like to list a property for immediate sale. It's in Bronzeville. A vintage bungalow. Yes, vacant as of last night. The previous owner is gone. Gone." Just like that, like I was a bag of trash she'd finally remembered to take to the curb. She was probably doing the math in her head, calculating the commission, imagining the wire transfer hitting her account when the knock came. It wasn't a polite knock. It wasn't a neighbor bringing a casserole. It was the kind of knock that rattles the doorframe. 3 heavy, solid raps. The sound of authority. She must have been annoyed. I can see her rolling her eyes, stomping to the door to tell off whoever was interrupting her victory lap. She swung the door open, ready to fight, but you don't fight what was standing on my porch. 2 officers from the Chicago PD stood there. Officer Bishop, a tall brother with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite, and Officer Kowalski, a sharp-eyed woman who didn't look like she missed a thing. They weren't smiling. "Ma'am," Officer Bishop said, his voice deep enough to rattle the floorboards, "we're looking for a Mr. Elijah Vance." Vanessa's smile didn't falter. It was plastered on tight. She leaned against the doorframe, posing. "He's not here, officer. He moved out last night. I'm the new owner of this property. Can I help you with something?" Officer Kowalski looked past Vanessa, her eyes scanning my living room, taking in the photos on the mantel, the old quilt on the couch. Then she looked back at Vanessa. "New owner. That's interesting." Vanessa's smile tightened. She didn't like that word. Is there a problem? There might be, Officer Kowalski said, flipping open her notebook. We just received a formal complaint from Mr. Vance's legal counsel. The complaint is for illegal entry, criminal trespass to residence, and unlawful occupation. Olivia told me later that the blood drained from Vanessa's face so fast it must have made her dizzy. The smugness evaporated. Illegal? Trespassing? What are you talking about? This is my house. My late husband left it to me. I have the deed. Good, Officer Bishop said. Calm. Steady. Ma'am, we're just here to take a report about the occupation. But that's not the only reason we were dispatched. Vanessa froze. Her hand gripped the door handle, her knuckles turning white. What other reason? Officer Bishop looked down at his paperwork, then back at her. We also received a formal request filed this morning citing new evidence to open an investigation into the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of Mr. Marcus Vance. That was the moment. The kill shot. Vanessa stumbled back, grabbing the doorframe to keep from falling. All the lies, all the arrogance, all that premature victory, it shattered right there on my front porch. Suspicious? She whispered. It was a heart attack. The doctor said so. That's what the initial report says, ma'am. But Mr. Vance's attorney seems to believe otherwise. We'll need to ask you a few questions. And, ma'am, you probably shouldn't try to list this house. It's considered part of an active crime scene now. Vanessa didn't say another word. She just stared at them, her mind racing, finally understanding that the old carpenter hadn't just wandered off to die. The old man had called his lawyer. The old man had called the police. The old man was hunting.
I wasn't at the police station. I wasn't sitting on a cold bench under flickering fluorescent lights. I was 40 floors above the loop. The offices of Sterling and Associates are all glass and chrome, looking out over the city I helped build from the ground up. The world down there looked small. The cars were like toys. The people were just ants scurrying along concrete tracks. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, holding a cup of hot tea I didn't want. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped the moment I walked out of my front door. Across the desk sat Olivia Sterling. She's 45, sharp as a diamond, and the only person on earth besides me who knew the truth about Martha's will. She was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first house. She was on the phone, her voice cold and precise. Yes, Officer Bishop, that's correct. Unlawful occupation. And yes, the formal request regarding the death of the beneficiary, Marcus Vance. I understand. Keep me informed. She hung up the phone and swiveled in her chair to face me. A small, tight smile played on her lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a shark in deep water. Well, she said, it's done. The police are on your porch right now. Just a preliminary visit. No arrests yet. She leaned forward. Vanessa won't be sleeping well tonight. I nodded, taking a slow sip of the chamomile. She had a paper, I said, my voice quiet. She said Marcus signed the house over to her 6 weeks ago. A quitclaim deed. I looked at Olivia, the question burning in my throat. Did he, Olivia? Did my boy really sign it? Olivia didn't answer right away. She turned to her large computer monitor, typed in a password, and clicked a file. I've been busy since you called me from the hotel, Eli. A document appeared on the screen. It was the deed. Vanessa's name listed as grantee. Marcus sent me a scan of this last week. He was confused. He said Vanessa had asked him to sign it, something about a bank loan application. He wanted to know what it meant. So he signed it, scanned it, and sent it to me for review before he did anything with the original. Hold on, I said, my heart sinking. So he signed it? She clicked again. A second document appeared. It was a copy of Marcus's signature from his business license. She clicked a third time. His signature from his passport. I sent the scan of the deed to our forensic document examiner at 4 this morning, Eli. He owes me a favor. Look closely. I leaned forward. I didn't need to be an expert to see it. The signature on the deed was shaky. The loop on the M was too round. The V in Vance was cramped, like a child trying to color inside the lines. Marcus's real signature was bold, angular, confident. "It's a fake, Eli," Olivia said softly. "A fraud. And according to our examiner, it's a terrible one. Amateur hour. It looks like it was traced, but by someone with a shaky hand and a guilty conscience." A wave of something washed over me. It wasn't relief. It was a deeper, colder kind of pain. My son hadn't betrayed me, but his wife had tried to erase him. "So, she forged his name?" I said, the words tasting like ash. "She tried to steal the house?" "Yes," Olivia said, closing the file. "She did. But that's not even the most important part, Eli." I frowned. "What's more important than fraud?" She leaned back, lacing her fingers together on the polished mahogany desk. She slid across the desk a large, heavy, leather-bound binder. The gold-embossed letters on the cover read, "The Martha Vance Trust." "We set this up the day after Martha's funeral. Remember? You were in a fog, but you signed the papers. We transferred every asset, every deed, every stock portfolio, every brick of every building you ever bought." She tapped the cover. "Including the bungalow in Bronzeville." The air in the room suddenly felt thin. I looked at Olivia and the pieces started to fall into place. "You, Elijah Vance, legally own nothing but the clothes on your back and the personal checking account I manage for you. You haven't owned that house in 10 years. The trust owns that house, and I am the executor." A slow, cold understanding settled over me. "So," I said, slowly, "even if Marcus had signed it, it would be a worthless piece of paper." "Exactly," Olivia said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "You cannot give away what you do not own. Marcus knew about the trust. He sat in this very office when we explained it. He knew he was a beneficiary, not the owner. He knew everything was protected. So, Vanessa," I trailed off, "Vanessa just tried to steal something that Marcus couldn't even give her," Olivia finished. "She's not just cruel, Eli. She's ignorant. She was so focused on the one little 3-bedroom house she could see, she never bothered to ask about the empire it was built on."
The legal victory was absolute. Vanessa was a fool. She had nothing. But the relief didn't come. Instead, a new, much darker question began to form in my mind. I looked out the window. The little ant cars were still moving, but my world had stopped. The gears were turning, the grief was clearing, and the sharp mind of the man who built that empire was finally taking over. "But, Olivia," I said slowly, turning back to face her, "that doesn't make sense." "Which part?" "Marcus," I said. "He knew the paper was worthless. He knew about the trust. He was my heir. He was going to inherit everything eventually." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. So why would he even entertain signing a document he knew was useless? Why would he send you a scan unless— Olivia's professional mask faded. She knew exactly where my mind was going. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a serious, low tone. "That, Eli," she said, "is the $20 million question. The number hung in the air between us. The true value of the trust. Why would he do something so illogical? Why would he be confused about a document he knew was fraudulent? Unless," my blood ran cold, "unless he didn't forge it. Unless he didn't sign it." "Exactly," Olivia said. "Unless Vanessa forged it, thinking Marcus owned the house and was planning to confront him with it. Or maybe Marcus found it. Maybe he sent me that scan because he was scared, because he knew something was wrong." She stood up and walked to the window, standing beside me, looking down on the city. "It's all connected, Eli. The fake signature, the invented debt, the desperate attempt to secure the one asset she could see." She turned to face me, her eyes filled with a cold fire. "It's all connected to the sudden, convenient, and very timely heart attack of a healthy 42-year-old man." She didn't have to say it. The word hung in the air like smoke. She didn't just want the house, Eli. She wanted it all. And Marcus, your son, he was just in her way.
The conference room at Sterling & Associates was designed for one purpose: intimidation. One wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a vertigo-inducing view of the loop. The table was a single slab of black walnut, polished until it looked like a dark lake. Vanessa sat on one side, flanked by her lawyer. I knew his type the moment he walked in. His name was Julian Cross. His suit was a shade of blue that was just a little too bright, his watch a little too big. He had the swagger of a man who thought he was the shark in the tank, unaware he was swimming with leviathans. Vanessa was back in character, the grieving widow. She wore a simple black dress and held a tissue like a prop. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I sat opposite them, silent. My hands, rough, scarred carpenter's hands, rested on the table. Olivia sat at the head, a general surveying the battlefield. Her files were arranged in 3 perfect, thin stacks. Julian Cross cleared his throat, a loud, self-important sound. "Let's make this simple," he said, sliding a copy of the quitclaim deed across the walnut. It stopped right in front of me. "My client, Mrs. Vanessa Vance, is the legal and rightful owner of the property in Bronzeville. Here is the deed, signed by her late husband, Mr. Marcus Vance, 6 weeks prior to his tragic passing." He leaned back, lacing his fingers over his vest. "Frankly, we are appalled. We understand you're grieving, Mr. Vance, but using that grief to harass a widow? It's despicable." Vanessa let out a small, perfectly timed sob into her tissue. "We are here as a courtesy," Cross continued, his voice dripping with synthetic syrup. "We don't want to add to anyone's pain, but if this harassment continues, calling the police, filing false reports, we will file for a restraining order, and we will sue for emotional distress." He spread his hands wide, flashing a blindingly white smile. "Now, what do you have to say?" I just looked at him. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch until he shifted in his seat. Olivia smiled. It was a cold, polite, razor-sharp expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for the performance, Mr. Cross. Now let's talk about facts." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This," she said, "is an affidavit from Dr. Eris, a board-certified forensic document examiner. He's already been retained as our expert witness." Cross's smug look faltered. He picked up the paper, skimming it. "Expert witnesses are a dime a dozen. We can get our own." "Oh, I insist you do," Olivia said, her smile widening. "But please have your expert check the ink density. Have him look at the hesitation marks on the upstroke of the M. Have him note the pressure patterns that indicate a slow, deliberate tracing." "Marcus was sick," Vanessa snapped, her voice shrill. "His hand was shaky." "Was he?" "Because his employees at the shop stated he was lifting transmissions the day before he died. They said he was in peak physical condition." She leaned forward. "No, the signature is a forgery, and a bad one." Cross scoffed, "But I saw a bead of sweat near his hairline." "That's a bold accusation. You can't prove it. It's he said, she said." "That's the funny part," Olivia said, her voice bright. "We don't have to." Cross looked lost. "What?" "I said we don't have to prove it's a forgery. I'll save you the trouble of hiring your own expert, Mr. Cross, because even if that signature was genuine, even if Marcus Vance came down from heaven and signed it in front of us with a golden pen, it wouldn't be worth the paper it's printed on."
Cross was pale now. "What are you talking about?" Olivia reached down and pulled out the heavy, leather-bound binder. It made a solid, expensive thud as she placed it on the table. "The Martha Vance Trust. This," Olivia said, tapping the gold letters, "is the trust established 10 years ago upon the death of Mr. Vance's wife. Mr. Elijah Vance, my client, does not personally own that bungalow. He hasn't owned it for a decade." She looked directly at Cross. "The trust owns that property, and as the executor, I can tell you unequivocally, it is not for sale." Cross's jaw dropped. He frantically shuffled his papers. That's not possible. We ran a title search. It's listed under Elijah and Martha Vance." "A common mistake for a sloppy lawyer," Olivia said, the kindness vanishing. "You ran a $50 online search. You didn't check the transfer of assets filed in the Cook County Recorder of Deeds, docket 15C. It's all public record. If you had done your due diligence, you would know your client's deed is worthless." Cross looked at Vanessa. The panic on his face was real. He realized his client had lied to him, involved him in fraud, and humiliated him. A trust fund?" he stammered. He looked at me, desperate. "He's just a carpenter. That's what my client said. Just a retired carpenter." Vanessa couldn't hold it in. The mask slipped. "He's right," she shrieked, jumping up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "A trust fund? You're lying." She pointed a shaking red-nailed finger at me. "He's just an old man. He lives in that dump. He wears work boots. He doesn't have a trust fund." She was panting, her eyes wide with rage. "You're a broke old carpenter, and you are lying." Olivia didn't raise her voice. She simply crossed her arms. "Oh, Mr. Cross, you still don't get it. You think this is about one little bungalow." She shook her head slowly. "Your client is right. Elijah is a carpenter. He's very proud of his work. But he is also the man who, over the last 40 years, quietly bought the land those hands worked on." Olivia turned her gaze to Vanessa. "Vanessa, you see the new condos in Bronzeville? The commercial strips? You see the money, but you never asked who owned the dirt before it was fashionable. Elijah and Martha bought lots when no one else would touch them. They didn't just work in this city. They invested in it." Olivia started ticking points off on her fingers. "As of this morning, the Martha Vance Trust holds the deeds to 12 apartment buildings on the south side, 3 commercial blocks in Hyde Park, and," she paused, gesturing around the opulent room, "the land this skyscraper sits on. We are their tenants." Vanessa's face went from red to a sick, chalky white. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the table for support. It was my turn. I leaned forward. I placed my hands, those broke carpenter hands, flat on the table. My voice was quiet, but in that silent room, it sounded like a gavel. We lived simply, Martha and I. We didn't believe in showing off. We didn't need fancy cars. We believed in building. I looked right into Vanessa's terrified eyes. My son, Marcus, he knew this. He knew all of it. I was teaching him how to manage the assets, how to read the ledgers, how to be a steward. I let the words hang there for a second. He was my heir. He was in training to take over the entire portfolio, an estate valued at roughly $20 million. Thwomp. Vanessa didn't just sit down, she collapsed. She fell back into her chair, her mouth open in a soundless O of pure shock. $20 million. She had married a prince and treated him like a pauper. She had murdered a man for a $300,000 house, never knowing he held the keys to the kingdom. The look on her face wasn't just fear. It was the agony of greed realizing what it had missed.
"So, you see," Olivia continued, picking up right where I left off, "we really don't care about the house. You can't have it, obviously. The trust will take possession by end of day." She waved a dismissive hand. "But the house is no longer the point." Vanessa looked up, dazed. What's the point?" Olivia leaned all the way across the table, her eyes like chips of black ice. "The point," she said, "is that we are very interested in why you felt the need to forge your husband's signature. We are interested in why you lied about non-existent debts." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And we are extremely interested in why my client's son, a healthy 42-year-old man, suddenly died of a heart attack right after you realized you couldn't get your hands on his money." The panic that flashed across Vanessa's face wasn't about money anymore. It was the terror of a trapped animal. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, grabbing her purse. "His death was a tragedy, an accident. It was his heart." She fled. Her lawyer scrambled after her, forgetting his briefcase, looking like he was going to be sick. The door clicked shut. The room was quiet again. "He's good," I said, breaking the silence. "Who?" Olivia asked. "The man waiting in your lobby." The door opened again, and a man walked in. He was built like an old oak tree, solid, heavy, immovable. He wore a trench coat that had seen better days, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and weary. "Luther Graves," Olivia said. "Meet Elijah Wentz." Luther shook my hand. His grip was firm. "Mr. Wentz, sorry for your loss." Luther was homicide for 20 years. Now he finds things the police don't have time to look for. Luther sat down, pulling out a worn notebook. He didn't waste words. "You think she killed him," Luther said. "It wasn't a question. I know she did," I said. "She told me Marcus was in debt. That was a lie. I want you to find the real debt. I want to know who she owed." Luther wrote in his notebook, Check the wife. She was desperate, Olivia added. She forged a deed for a small house when she was sitting on a fortune she didn't know about. That screams desperation. Find out everything, I said. Find her gambling debts, find her boyfriends, find out what she bought in the weeks before he died. I want to know why she was in such a hurry. Luther closed the notebook. He looked at me, and I saw the recognition of one old soldier to another. Mr. Wance, in my experience, when people are that desperate, they don't need a complicated reason. They just need a deadline. He stood up. I'll start with her financials. If she owes money to the wrong people in this town, I'll find out. I'll have something in 48 hours. He nodded once and left. Olivia and I sat in the silence. The first stone had been thrown. Now we just had to wait for the ripples. She called me old man, I said quietly, looking at the city. She thought I was weak. She thought I was stupid. I turned to my lawyer, the cold anger in my bones hardening into steel. She's about to find out exactly who she picked a fight with.
48 hours is a long time when you're waiting for a ghost to speak. I spent 2 days pacing the floor of my hotel room, watching the sun drag itself across the Chicago skyline, thinking about 42 years of fatherhood, thinking about the boy who used to sit on my workbench and hand me nails, thinking about the man who married a woman with hungry eyes. Luther Graves was punctual. At exactly 9 o'clock on the second morning, he knocked once on Olivia's office door. He walked in carrying that same battered briefcase and the air of a man who had walked through a sewer and kept his shoes clean. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, but the eyes themselves were sharp, alert. He nodded at me, sat down, and opened a file on the black walnut table. "Mr. Vance," Luther began, his voice a low rumble, "you asked me to find out if Vanessa was in debt." "Was she?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse. Luther looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Vance, your daughter-in-law wasn't just in debt, she was drowning in it." "You said she was playing the grieving widow," Olivia said, her hands steepled on the desk. "That's the role she's playing for the public," Luther said. "But grief took her on a little road trip." He slid a glossy photograph across the table. It wasn't a posed shot. It was grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Vanessa. She was standing at a blackjack table, a stack of chips in front of her. She wasn't crying. She looked frantic, her posture rigid, her eyes glued to the dealer's hands. "Where is this?" I asked, my stomach turning. "The high-limit room at the Horseshoe, just across the Indiana border, taken 12 hours ago. The night after she tried to kick you out of your house, she drove an hour south to gamble. And she wasn't just playing, Mr. Vance. She was chasing losses. Badly." He slid a second photo over. This one was taken outside, under the harsh sodium glare of the casino's valet entrance. Vanessa was backed against a concrete pillar, looking terrified. Standing over her was a man, wide as a vending machine, wearing a suit that cost $200 and a watch that cost $20,000. He was smiling, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. It was the kind of smile a wolf gives a lamb. "Who is that?" Olivia asked, leaning in. "That," Luther said, "is Tony the Vice Vargo. He runs loan operation out of Cicero. He's not a bank, and he doesn't report to credit agencies. My source on the ground said she was begging him for more time. She wasn't there to relax. She was there to plead for her life." "So I was right," I said, the heavy realization settling on my shoulders. "She's in deep." "You don't know the half of it," Luther replied. He flipped a page in his notebook. "You said she accused Marcus of being in debt. That was the first thing I checked." He looked at me and his eyes softened for just a second. "Your son, Mr. Vance, he was clean, meticulous. His shop is fully in the black. His credit score was over 800. He had zero debt outside of his share of the property taxes, which were paid early. He was a solid citizen, just like you raised him. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My boy hadn't lied to me. But Vanessa," Luther continued, his voice hardening, "Vanessa is a financial ghost. On paper, she has no credit cards, no car loans, no mortgage. Nothing. Which is strange for a 40-year-old woman in 2025. She always said Marcus handled the money. He did. He paid for her life, but he refused to pay for her habits. I had to dig deep. I pulled records from offshore accounts, crypto wallets, and sports betting sites based in Costa Rica. That's where the real story is.
He turned the notebook around so we could see the numbers. Mrs. Vance has 3 active, high-interest lines of credit with offshore gambling sites. She's been kiting money, moving funds between accounts to cover the minimums for 2 years. And she's been losing. A lot. How much, Luther? Olivia asked, her voice like a whip crack. As of this morning, Luther said, between the online sites and what my source says she owes Tony Vargo, she is $150,000 in the hole. $150,000. The room went silent. The hum of the building seemed to fade away. That was enough money to ruin a life, and she had tried to fix it by stealing a $300,000 bungalow.
And the trust, Olivia whispered, is worth $20 million. She was sitting on a gold mine, drowning for lack of a penny. It gets worse, Luther said. She tried to touch the house before. I found 3 rejected loan applications from last month, home equity loans, all forged, all using Marcus's name. The banks rejected them because the property title didn't match. So she faked the deed, I said, the pieces locking together. She faked the deed, thinking she could bypass the bank and use the house as direct collateral for Vargo. Exactly, Luther said. She was out of time. She was desperate. But Marcus found out.
Olivia looked up sharply. The argument? You found the footage? I did, Luther said. He pulled a small laptop from his briefcase and spun it around to face us. From the BP station on Halstead, the night he died, the call to 911 was made from their apartment at 10:03 p.m. This footage is from 9:15 p.m. He pressed play. There it was. Marcus's familiar blue Ford truck parked under the bright, buzzing halo of the gas station lights. Marcus was in the driver's seat. Vanessa was in the passenger seat. There was no audio, but we didn't need it. The violence in that cab was palpable. Marcus was yelling. His face was dark, contorted with a rage I had never seen in my son, not once in his entire life. He was shaking, his whole body rigid. Vanessa was screaming back at him, her face twisted and ugly, her hands flying in the air. "My God," I whispered, my hand covering my mouth. "What's that in his hand?" "Watch," Luther said. On the screen, Marcus roared something we couldn't hear. He reached down, grabbed a thick stack of papers and threw them. He hurled them right into Vanessa's face. The white pages exploded in the cab, scattering across the dashboard in her lap like snow. Vanessa recoiled as if she'd been slapped. Then she started scrambling, her hands grabbing at the papers, trying to gather them up. Marcus just pointed a finger in her face, his arms straight and shaking, yelling, yelling, yelling. Then he slammed both hands on the steering wheel so hard the truck rocked on its suspension. He was telling her it was over. I knew my son, that was the end. Luther paused the video. He drove off 2 minutes later. Less than an hour after that, Vanessa called 911 to report her husband was unconscious. I stared at the frozen image of my son's angry, betrayed face. The papers were frozen in midair, a blur of white against the darkness.
What were those papers, Luther? I asked. Was it the forgery, the gambling debts? That's what I assumed, Luther said. But that stack was thick, 20, maybe 30 pages. It looked official. I spent all yesterday trying to figure it out. And then I started thinking, if Marcus found out about the forgery and the debt, what does a smart man do? He doesn't just yell at a gas station, I said, realizing where he was going. He protects himself. He calls a lawyer, Olivia said. But he didn't call me. No, Luther said, because this wasn't about the trust. This was marital. This was personal. He reached into his briefcase again. I checked his private cell records. He made 3 calls to a number in the loop. A private practice, a high-priced family law specialist named Elena Ross. Very discreet, very expensive. A divorce attorney, I whispered. I went to her office this morning. I showed Ms. Ross my badge, well, my old badge, and explained the situation. She cited attorney-client privilege at first, but when I mentioned the words suspicious death and $20 million, she decided to be cooperative. Luther pulled out a legal-sized envelope. He slid it across the table. "What is this?" Olivia asked, her hand resting on it. "Those," Luther said, "are copies of the papers Marcus threw in her face." My hand trembled as I reached out. Olivia opened the flap and pulled out the contents. "My God, Eli," she whispered. She laid them on the table. The first document was a petition for dissolution of marriage, filed 2 days before he died. The second one, Luther said, his voice quiet, is a new will. The lawyer said Marcus was incredibly proud of it. He signed it, had it witnessed and notarized just 3 days before he died. I looked down. Last will and testament of Marcus Vance. It was simple. 1 page. It revoked all previous wills, and in clear, bold type, it stated that 100% of his personal estate, his business, his truck, his savings, everything outside of the trust, was to be left to his father, Elijah Vance. Vanessa's name was nowhere on it. I looked at Olivia, and the final terrible piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Vanessa didn't just know she was in debt, she knew she was being cut off. She knew she was being divorced. She knew she was being disinherited. She wasn't just losing a house, she was losing everything. And on that night, at that gas station, Marcus had handed her the proof. He had handed her her own motive for murder.
I wasn't there when the courier arrived at the bungalow, but I've built enough structures in my life to know exactly how a demolition happens. It starts with a single crack, a stress fracture that spreads until the whole facade comes down. Vanessa was probably pacing the living room, my living room, counting the minutes until she could sell Martha's antique sideboard. When the doorbell rang, she likely signed for the heavy legal envelope with an annoyed flourish, thinking it was just more incompetence from her shiny-suited lawyer. She ripped it open with one of those blood-red nails. She pulled out the documents. I imagine the silence in that house got very heavy, very fast. She read the first page, a formal notice from Sterling and Associates informing her of the civil investigation regarding the fraudulent deed. Old news, she probably thought. She could bluff her way through that. Then, she turned the page. The forensic report. It detailed, in cold, scientific language, the hesitation marks in the signature, the ink density, the evidence of tracing. It was a mirror held up to her crime. Her heart would have started to hammer against her ribs. Then, the third page, an affidavit from Elena Ross, the divorce attorney, a sworn statement that Marcus Vance had retained her services to end his marriage. And finally, the fourth page, the kill shot, a certified copy of Marcus's new will. The paper must have slipped from her fingers, drifting to the floor like a dead leaf. She wasn't just losing the house, she had already lost it before Marcus even died. The divorce meant she got nothing in life. The will meant she got nothing in death. And the debt meant she was a dead woman walking. She was trapped in a box of her own making. She was a self-confessed fraud, facing a mountain of debt, with a murder investigation breathing down her neck. She stood in the center of the home she had killed for, realizing it was actually a prison cell.
I know how people like Vanessa think. When a cornered animal realizes it can't run, it doesn't surrender. It bites. She couldn't fight me on the facts. The facts would put her in a jumpsuit for the rest of her natural life. She couldn't fight me with money. She had just learned I had all of it. So she decided to fight me with the only weapon she had left, the weapon of the weak and the wicked. She decided to change the story. She picked up her phone. Her hands were likely shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a cold, calculating rage. She scrolled past the loan sharks and the bookies until she found a contact she'd saved for a rainy day. Danny Pierce, Channel 5 News, a reporter with a cheap haircut and a hunger for a scandal. She took a deep breath. She closed her eyes. And when she opened them, the panicked fraud was gone. The grieving widow was back. "Danny?" she would have whispered, her voice cracking with practiced perfection. "It's Vanessa. Vanessa Vance. Marcus's wife. I don't know who else to call. Something terrible is happening. It's my father-in-law, Elijah Vance. Yes, the developer. He's trying to destroy me." She spun the web. "I'm a widow, Danny. My husband is in the ground for 2 days, and this man, this rich, powerful man, is throwing me out on the street. He's saying I'm a criminal. He's using his money and his lawyers to crush me because I'm not like them." She played the race card, she played the class card, she played every card in the deck. "He never accepted me," she cried. "He's punishing me for loving his son. Please, Danny, you have to help me. I have no one."
She hung up the phone. The tears stopped instantly. She couldn't win in a court of law, so she was going to put me on trial on the 6 o'clock news.
I was in my hotel room when Olivia called. She didn't say hello. Turn on Channel 5, Eli, now. I fumbled for the remote, my fingers stiff. The television flickered to life. There was my house, my porch. The porch where I had smoked 1,000 pipes and watched the neighborhood change. And there was Vanessa. She looked small, fragile. She was wearing a white blouse, symbol of innocence, and no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She was dabbing her eyes with a crumpled tissue as Danny Pierce leaned in with a face of professional concern. "I just don't know where to turn," Vanessa whispered on screen, looking like a gust of wind could blow her away. "My husband, he's only been gone a few days." The camera zoomed in on a single tear rolling down her cheek. It was a masterpiece of acting. "Mrs. Vance," the reporter said, his voice grave, "you've made some serious allegations. Can you tell us what's happening?" "It's my father-in-law," she said, saying my name like it was a slur. "Elijah Vance. He's trying to throw me out of my own home." "Evicting you? Just days after the funeral?" "Yes," she sobbed. "He's a very wealthy man, a real estate baron. He owns half the South Side, and I'm just a widow with nothing. He wants to take the one thing Marcus left me." I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, unable to breathe. She was standing on the planks I had laid, painting me as a monster to the entire city. "He never liked me," she continued, looking right into the lens. "Maybe it's because I'm from a different world. Maybe it's because I'm white, and he has his own community. He has power. He has teams of lawyers. And what do I have? Nothing. Just my husband's memory. And he's trying to steal that too." Danny Pierce turned to the camera, outrage plastered on his face. "A shocking accusation. A grieving widow facing eviction by a millionaire developer. We reached out to Mr. Vance for comment, but have not heard back." My phone started buzzing. Then the hotel landline. Then my other cell. It was a storm, sudden and violent. Olivia was still on the line. "Eli, you there?" "She did it," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "She's standing on my porch telling the world I'm a racist tyrant. After she killed him, after she betrayed him." I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights blurred in my vision. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's counting on the optics, the big, bad developer versus the poor, defenseless woman. "Yes," Olivia said, "she is." "Get on the phone," I ordered, the anger rising in my chest like bile. "Call the station. We'll show them the will. We'll show them the divorce papers, the gambling debts. We'll destroy her on live TV." "No." The words stopped me cold. "No? Olivia, she is slandering my name. She is destroying 40 years of reputation in 5 minutes." "Listen to me, Eli. This is exactly what she wants. She's cornered. She has no facts. She wants a mud fight." "So we let her win?" I roared. "We let her talk," Olivia corrected, her tone icy. "We let her go on every show that will have her. We let her cry her crocodile tears all over Chicago. We let her lie and lie and lie again." "Why?" "Because she isn't just lying, Eli. She is committing perjury. Every word she says on that screen is evidence we can disprove with hard documentation. She is building our case for us. She is hanging herself with her own tongue." I gripped the phone tight. "It feels like losing, Olivia." "It's not losing," she said. "It's hunting. Luther is still working. He's talking to the coroner's office right now. He's pulling the talk screens. We aren't going to argue with her on a talk show." She paused, and I could hear the steel in her voice. "We will respond in court, Eli. With the forged deed, with the divorce papers, with the gambling debts. And when we do, we won't just take back your name. We will take away her freedom. Forever." I looked down at the city. The rage in my chest began to cool, hardening back into that familiar block of ice. She was right. The loudest person in the room is the weakest. "All right," I whispered. "Let her talk."
The Daily Center courthouse is a cold place. Even in the summer, it smells of floor wax, stale coffee, and desperate prayers. It's not like on television. There is no dramatic music, just the hollow echo of footsteps on marble and the low hum of lives being dismantled. I sat on a hard wooden bench next to Olivia, wearing my Sunday suit. The charcoal one. The one I wore to bury Martha. The one I wore to bury Marcus. Across the aisle sat Vanessa. She was back in her widow's costume. A delicate veil, a black dress that whispered, "Pity me," and a lace handkerchief she dabbed at dry eyes. She was performing. Her lawyer, Julian Cross, was strutting in front of the judge's bench like a rooster who thought he owned the henhouse. The courtroom was half full. That reporter, Danny Pierce, was in the front row, his pen hovering over his notepad. Vanessa had made sure of that. She wanted an audience for her victory. "Your Honor," Julian Cross boomed, his voice filling the high-ceilinged room. "This is a tragedy. A simple, heartbreaking tragedy." He gestured dramatically toward Vanessa, who produced a soft, trembling sob right on cue. "We are here because my client, a grieving, penniless widow, is being harassed. Harassed by this man." He pointed a manicured finger at me. "Elijah Vance, a man who, we have recently discovered, is not a simple carpenter, but a wealthy real estate baron, a man of considerable hidden power." He let those words hang in the air, thick and heavy. "This is a case of greed, Your Honor. Mr. Vance is leveraging the death of his own son to persecute his daughter-in-law. And I must say, the optics are disturbing. A powerful man using teams of lawyers to evict a vulnerable woman from the only home she has left."
I watched the judge, Judge Alston, an older woman with eyes that looked like they had seen every lie Chicago had to offer. She didn't blink. She just looked bored. "My client is the victim here," Cross finished, looking very pleased with himself. "This is nothing short of a public lynching, and we demand justice." He sat down. Danny Pierce was scribbling frantically. Judge Alston looked at us. Her voice was tired. "Miss Sterling, your response." Olivia stood up. She didn't strut. She didn't shout. She was the picture of calm, deadly competence. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear, "Mr. Cross is correct about one thing. This is a tragedy, but it is not the one he is describing." She picked up the forged deed from the table. "He has filed a suit to claim ownership of that property in Bronzeville. He claims his client is the victim." Olivia placed the paper back down. "We are not here to debate the ownership of that house, Your Honor. In fact, we move for an immediate summary dismissal of this entire case." Julian Cross shot up from his chair. "On what grounds? We have a deed. It is a valid legal document." Judge Alston fixed him with a cold stare. "Sit down, Mr. Cross. You will wait your turn." She looked back at Olivia. "On what grounds, Miss Sterling?" "On the grounds that the suit is frivolous, Your Honor," Olivia said. "The grantor, Mr. Marcus Vance, had no legal authority to sign that deed, because neither he nor his father, my client, owns that property." Cross's mouth dropped open. "What?" "The property," Olivia continued, "like all of Mr. Vance's holdings, was placed into a protected, irrevocable trust, the Martha Vance Trust, 10 years ago. Mr. Elijah Vance is the beneficiary. I am the executor." She turned to face the stunned courtroom. "Marcus Vance could not give away a house he did not own." Vanessa's lawyer looked completely lost. That's not possible. We ran a title search. The property is listed under Elijah Vance." "You ran a $50 online search." Olivia cut in, her voice sharp as a razor. "You didn't check the transfer of assets filed in the Cook County docket. It is all public record. If you had bothered to do your due diligence, counselor, you would have known your client's deed is worthless." Cross turned white. He looked at Vanessa, panic rising in his eyes. He just realized his client had lied to him, and he had just embarrassed himself on public record. Judge Alston looked at him over her glasses. "Is this true, Mr. Cross? Did you check the trust filings?" We were not aware," he stammered. The judge raised her gavel. Bang. "Then this case is dismissed. We are done here." Vanessa looked at Cross, her face twisted in confusion and rage. "What does that mean? What just happened?" "It means," Cross whispered, packing his briefcase with shaking hands, "you lost the house." But Olivia wasn't finished. She didn't sit down. "Your Honor," she said, her voice rising slightly, Before we are dismissed, Mr. Cross, on behalf of his client, publicly accused my client of harassment and malicious intent. He did this on television, and he did it again in this courtroom. The truth must be entered into the record. Judge Alston sighed. Ms. Sterling, the case is dismissed. I understand, Your Honor, Olivia said firmly. But the reason for this fraudulent deed is now part of an active criminal investigation. The press is here. The truth must be heard. The judge looked at Danny Pierce, then at me, then back at Olivia. You have 2 minutes, Ms. Sterling. Make them count. Olivia smiled. Thank you. She walked toward the center of the room. Mr. Cross claims his client is a penniless widow. He is half right. She is penniless. But not because my client is greedy. Olivia held up a new file. She is penniless because she has a $150,000 gambling debt owed to Mr. Tony Vargo of Cicero. Vanessa gasped. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Cross tried to object, but the judge waved him down. She was desperate, Olivia continued, which is why she forged the deed. She knew she couldn't ask her husband for the money. Why? Because Mr. Marcus Vance had just served her with these. Olivia held up the second document, a petition for divorce. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Danny Pierce was writing so fast I thought smoke would rise from his notepad. Mr. Marcus Vance knew exactly who he was married to, which is why 3 days before he died, he signed a new will. She held up the third document, a will that explicitly disinherits his wife, Vanessa, and leaves 100% of his personal estate to his father. The room was in shock. Vanessa finally found her voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was a raw, animal scream. Liar, you are a liar. He loved me. He would never.
Bang, bang, bang. Order, Judge Alston shouted. Mrs. Vance, control yourself, or I will have you removed. Vanessa was shaking, her face red, her veil torn askew. Olivia waited. She waited until the screams turned into hysterical, gasping sobs. Then she delivered the final blow. She is right about one thing, Your Honor, Olivia said quietly. Marcus isn't here to tell us. She made sure of that. Objection, Cross yelled, desperate to save his own skin. Slander! My client is the victim. It is not slander when it is a fact, Olivia said coldly. Your Honor, because of this clear financial motive, the divorce, the disinheritance, the debt, we petitioned the state for a full autopsy. We had Marcus Vance's body exhumed last week. Vanessa froze. Her sobs cut off instantly. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax doll. Olivia held up the last file, the thickest one. I have here the final report from the Cook County Medical Examiner. Marcus Vance did not die of a heart attack. His heart was perfectly healthy. I watched Vanessa. She wasn't breathing. He died, Olivia announced, of massive systemic internal bleeding caused by lethal doses of warfarin, rat poison, administered in his coffee over a period of several weeks. A slow, agonizing death. Olivia turned from the judge. She looked directly at Vanessa. You didn't just lose the house, Vanessa. You murdered him. Vanessa collapsed. It wasn't a faint. It was a complete structural failure. A wail tore out of her throat, a sound of pure, damned guilt. And then I saw them, Officer Bishop and Officer Kowalski. They had been standing quietly at the back of the courtroom the entire time. They began to walk forward, the heavy clomp-clomp of their boots, the only sound in the room. They walked past the gasping reporter. They walked past the shocked crowd. They walked right up to the defense table where Vanessa was sobbing, screaming, "No, no, he's lying. The old man framed me." Officer Bishop put a heavy hand on her shoulder. Vanessa Vance, you are under arrest for the first-degree murder of Marcus Vance. The reporter's camera flashed, a blinding white light capturing the end of her lies. Vanessa screamed as they pulled her to her feet, twisted her arms behind her back, and snapped the handcuffs on. "It was him," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me as they dragged her away. "It was the old man. He killed his own son." But no one was listening. They dragged her out of the courtroom, her screams echoing down the marble hallway until the heavy doors slammed shut. I just sat there. I watched her go. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel relief. I just felt quiet. I looked at the empty chair where my son's murderer had just been, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt the ice in my chest finally begin to melt. Justice, Martha. We kept our promise.
It was 3 months before I could walk back into the bungalow on Bronzeville. 3 months of depositions. 3 months of signing papers. 3 months of listening to the ugly details of Vanessa's appeals being denied. The state's case was airtight. First-degree murder with special circumstances for financial gain. She wasn't ever getting out. She was going to die in a cage, just like she deserved. The media circus had finally died down. The cameras were gone. The street was quiet. I had asked Olivia to meet me there. The police tape had been removed weeks ago, but I hadn't been able to cross the threshold until today. The house smelled musty, like a place that had been locked up with its grief for too long, but it was clean. Olivia had hired a service to put everything back in order. She was sitting at the kitchen table, the one I built, sipping tea. She looked tired, but she smiled when I walked in. "It's good to see you're home, Eli," she said softly. I nodded, my throat tight. I walked over to the mantel. The pictures were still there, me and Martha. Marcus, 7 years old, holding up a crooked birdhouse he'd made in my workshop, a gap-toothed smile plastered on his face. "She's pleading guilty next week," Olivia said to my back, "to avoid the death penalty. She'll get life without parole." I touched the frame of Marcus's photo. A life for a life. Seems like a bad trade. I turned and sat down across from her. The kitchen was just as I'd left it, except for a large roll of paper spread out on the table.
Blueprints. Olivia looked at them, then at me. "So what are you going to do now, Eli, with all of this?" "All of this," I repeated, looking around the small, simple room. This little bungalow was what she killed for. This little pile of wood and plaster. I looked back at the blueprints. "The craziest part," I said, my voice rough, "is that she did all of it for this, a $300,000 house. She had no idea she was married to the heir of an empire. She murdered a prince for pocket change." "She was ignorant, Eli," Olivia said, "and she was greedy. It's a fatal combination." I was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the clock on the wall, the same clock that had ticked through Marcus's entire childhood. "You've been busy, Eli," Olivia said, pointing to the papers. "I've been thinking," I said, "thinking about what Martha wanted. Protect the work," she told me. I thought she meant the money, the buildings, the assets. But I was wrong. Wrong? I unrolled the blueprints. They weren't for a house. They were for a large, low-slung building with wide doors and high ceilings. She didn't mean the money, Olivia. She meant the work itself, the value of it, the pride. I looked out the kitchen window, toward the neighborhood I'd lived in my whole life, toward the kids I saw on the corners with nothing to do, nowhere to go. Kids who looked just like Marcus did once upon a time. "I want you to start the process," I said, my voice steady. "Liquidate the commercial block in Hyde Park and the apartments on King Drive. We have enough. Enough for what? You moving to the Bahamas?" I smiled. It was small, but it was real. "No. I'm staying right here. It's time to use the trust for what it was meant for." I tapped the blueprints. "I'm going to build a community center, right here. A place for these kids. But not just for basketball. I'm building a workshop. A state-of-the-art carpentry and mechanics shop. Free for any kid in Chicago who wants to learn how to build something with their hands instead of taking what isn't theirs." Olivia looked at the plans, then back at me. I saw the professional mask melt away. I saw the girl who used to run around these streets with my son. "We'll teach them how to read a plan," I said, a new purpose settling into my bones. How to measure twice and cut once. How to respect the tools. How to feel that pride when you make something real. "What are you going to call it?" she asked. I looked back at the mantel, at my boy with his crooked birdhouse. "We're going to call it Marcus's workshop." I looked back at Olivia. "Martha and I spent 40 years building assets. It's time to stop building assets. It's time to start building a future."
If there is one thing I have learned from this nightmare, it is this: never underestimate the person who is quiet. The world is full of people like Vanessa, people who measure your worth by the shine on your shoes or the brand of your car. They are loud, they are arrogant, and they are blind. But true strength, true wealth, that is built in silence. It is built on character, patience, and loyalty. Greed always overplays its hand. Greed always destroys itself. The truth just waits patiently in the shadows, ready for its moment to be told. So, look closely at the people around you. And remember, the man in the corner with the calloused hands might just own the building you're standing in. Good night.